Hello. Today I'm going to talk about C3 language and hello. Today I'm going to talk about now I got some bad C3 sorry about that. Yeah. Where should I start? Well, I guess you've already seen this one. It's the C3 homepage, or the documentation anyway. C3 was built after I worked on C2. And C2 is a programming language by Pascal. I don't know how he's pronouncing it. And he did this, I think this presentation he did back in 2015. According to this, he started to work on C2 in 2013. And it was built on top of Clang. Originally, he would use the preprocessor and so on. And I think he intended it to be like basically a variant of C, just like C++ inside of this compiler. But he told me that because doing these the compilation model for C2 with complete files, no headers and so on, that was a bad fit for Clang. So he changed it a lot, and now it's sort of just contains some of Clang. And C3 is basically doing, keeping to a lot of the C2 design goals, which is to be, C is just like saying that let's build a complete different language, and he has that here. Like, it shouldn't do any high-level features. It shouldn't be a completely new language. And something, I think that I'm following in C3 as well. However, I'm also saying like there are some things that are a bit more high level that you need, that C doesn't have. And I think, like, to begin with, my story sort of started, I don't know if back with Swift, actually. So when Swift was getting released and everyone was trying it out, there was some people feeling like, oh, this is not Objective-C, like without the C. This is a completely, like, this is C++ without the C, maybe. And there were a few persons, me included, that would like sort of think about what would Objective-C look like 3.0. And there was this, at the time, there was a language called Eero or something like that, that would basically take Objective-C and then strip the syntax a bit, making it more like a script, more script-like. I think that project is dead now, but then sort of I was thinking that maybe I would contribute to that one, or do something like that, and that got me into looking at how to design a language that I would like to have. And I can say that my ideas at the time were totally stupid and bad. And I would have like all sorts of ideas about making macros and extending a language and stuff like that. So I sort of looked at that and sort of thought of different types of syntax and so on, but then eventually I sort of put that on the back burner. Let's see if I can avoid dropping frames here. So I put that in the back burner and didn't really think about that on much until Jai, or how you want to pronounce it, showed up. Of course, it's Jonathan Snow's project, and he would like basically sit down and he would say like, C is pretty good, you know. And I guess I was still a bit in you know, this is like has to do too with my own experience. I started programming BASIC, then I learned Pascal, then I did a tiny bit of C, and then I jumped to C++, and I started working doing C++, and then Java, and then Perl, and more Java, and then, sort of all sorts of languages. But Java sort of put me on into doing object-oriented style code. And this is going to be a longer explanation why I left object-oriented style of programming. I had this game that I once wrote. Originally, it was written in BASIC, and it was an online door. And online doors, sort of like back in the days, so we had modems and connected to BBSs run by other people who would have their modems and their computers connected to the telephone line, and you would call them, and then you could, write stuff on their message boards, but you could also maybe play some games or vote for something or something else. And those small programs were called doors, and a door could be a game. And there was this game that was really awesome that I wanted to do a version of, and I wrote that. Originally I didn't have back in the day, this was like the early 90s, late 80s. Getting just a BASIC for your computer, like a BASIC or Pascal or something like that was, you had to pay for that, and I was a poor student, and obviously I just took that whatever I had. And what I had at the time was Quick Basic, and I don't recommend doing anything big in Quick Basic because it's extremely like the old Quick Basic, like back on DOS, because I think it took you could do stuff in 16 kilobytes of memory at each part of the program could be 16 kilobytes or something like that. And then you had to have another module, another source file that you basically all the variables that you had that wanted to use in the other part of your program. You'd have to pause that explicitly at the top. Okay, I can't express how insane that was, but I only had that, and then later I got Turbo Pascal, and that was fine. You could do a lot of things in Turbo Pascal. I wrote a lot of. I wrote online doors. I was hacking one of the BBS software that I got hold of, and I did stuff to that. It was Pascal was fine, fine, and it was really productive when I was, in 19, 20, so, and it was completely productive. We didn't think of anything objective oriented. We just, wrote the code, wrote the functions. And then I sort of started working. I was C++, doing slightly object-oriented, but mostly not. And I was doing some easy consultant work, and then, doing more and more objective-oriented code. And I wanted this game that I had first written in Quick Basic and then actually ported to Pascal. I wanted to take that and write that in Java. But I totally couldn't make it work because I couldn't figure out this is going to be so much, the model is going to be so incredibly complex, and how do I model this? So I would work on this and like think about that model over and over and over, and I couldn't really find a good way to do it until one day I started writing it in Ruby, and for some reason I was like, okay, just I because Ruby lets you get like you can create a lot of classes if you want to Ruby, but it's easy. It's not like if you do it in Java, you feel like you're working and working and you're doing a lot of stuff when you just set up classes, but you don't have that really in Ruby. And so I sort of settled on something which was just like this data blob, which contained all the data, and that was pretty much what I would do back in when I wrote it in Pascal. And in Quick Basic, you have the data structure, and it was flat, and there were no objects around it. It's like it wasn't modeled into small, small leaves. It's a huge map, right? Hash maps, sort of, and then there were like smaller hash maps and so on. I just wrote it with hash maps, right? And then we have like commands, stuff were happening. You would like trade, and yeah, that was like a small piece of code. Then it's like a function, right? It was just like in Pascal. It's like, okay, I call the function. If you ask me to do this, you want to trade. Okay, I call this function, and it's going to take your player, and it's going to do the trade, and it's going to manipulate the whole this data structure, and that worked great because I could like. I did a trick in Ruby. It was like, because a problem when you do this is if you have some query you want to do, you want to trade, and then you can find that maybe you don't have enough money, or you run into some other validation issue. The problem is you have to do all the validation up front if you can't roll back the whole thing. So, and that's extremely bug prone. If you don't do it correctly, then you're screwed. So, but with Ruby, there was some really simple way to basically serialize the whole game state, right? So what I would do is in the early Ruby version was basically I serialized the whole thing, the whole game state, everything, and it was simple because this was just like a nested tree, right? And then I would do everything, and if anything broke, like some check somewhere, because it could do all the checks then, I would just roll back everything. So it would say like you did this wrong, and I rolled everything and it worked. I could be like super sure that this worked, and it was just because I had this blob of data that I had functions, acting on. But I would never in my whole life have thought that this was like a legitimate design if I used, the sort of Java I was taught, because that was sort of, okay, here I have like this is I don't know, a player, and it contains here's like the gold thing that it has like a gold back, and then it cloud all the way down, and that got me started down like questioning how I would organize my code, and then we had I started watching Jonathan Blow's videos on his language, and I got interested in maybe I should start doing more procedural code again, because I started remembering like, God, I was really productive when I was doing Pascal back in the days, and I'm really not doing much more than I was doing back then when I program, let's say Objective-C or Swift or C++. And so I started to look at the alternatives, and because Blow's his language wasn't done yet, so I was looking at the SIG language, and SIG was competing with C, as Kelly stated. Zig didn't really click with me, I guess. I have a bunch of issues with like it's a Kelly has a very strong opinion of what the language should do. I totally respect that. It's just that I don't quite click with the decisions made. And I was like thinking, like, should I contribute to SIG and start doing that? And ultimately, I was like, no, it doesn't quite fit me. I was like going on and off, and it's like, should I do something? I was sketching on programming language. Maybe I would like to do like before, back in the Objective-C Swift times. When that was released, I was thinking about it. Should I do something? And I tried my hand doing a bit, but it just didn't come together. And sort of eventually, I got back and started looking at C2 again, and I was like, yeah, this is. I mean, C is obviously a clearly procedural language, and the additions that Bas did, those are very conservative, and yet I think it really helps the language getting some of the pain points out of the way, like the modules. And by the way, feel free to ask questions at any point here. I'm just happy if you have any questions. The problem here is that Bas had basically abandoned the language in I think in 2016, 17, so it was going forward, but not really at a high pace. And so when I went in and started contributing in 2019, it was like I felt that it was going slow, and Bas didn't really have the ambition to take it beyond a hobby project. So I started working also on a C implementation of C2. And the main reason for that was I wanted semantic macros to work in C2. And the way C2 handles some things, I was not sure, but I felt it would not really be possible to do the sort of compile time evaluation that you want, like that you wanted for macros to actually work. And as I was doing that, I was also writing up a spec for C3, sort of like if I would take C2 and just do it according to my own wishes, what would I do? But still, like keep within that focused framework of C2. In like this is basically C, just improve it a bit. Like where would I go then? And so that's where I ended up with, basically, trying to keeping the C2 stuff, but also adding some generics. The generic modules, those are basically trying to emulate the macros, the generic type macros that, like when you can do generics in C using macros. You basically write up the type and some functions, and they all basically macros, and then you define them, and then with some name, and you got it for whatever, like a hash map, for example, for whatever type you have. So I want to do that. So that's how like the generic modules basically designed. And I wanted to do something nicer for errors, and I was seeing like the proposal about getting a common way to return errors for C and C++. So that got me thinking, and maybe it would be possible to do so. And then, like, the big thing about C that causes probably the most problems is that it doesn't have an easy to array that contains the length of itself. So, that's like the basic thing that I want to do is like also get this, good arrays and good strings. And that has a different reason, not just like you want to add that out of nowhere. It's because I was doing a lot of PHP consulting, and I was like, the design that we were using was we would not really leverage object orientation that much, but everything was sort of written. We had used some classes as basically namespaces, and the whole thing that makes like PHP easy to work with is not PHP sort of the language features like reflection and stuff like that. It's basically that you have an array, right? You have an array that also happens to be a map, whatever. It's not important, but you have an array that's sort of flexible, and you have a string concatenation and stuff like that. Like if you had easy to go to strings in C, and you had easy arrays in C, then you basically would not need to go elsewhere. And you can get, good, there are interesting string libraries for C, where you, for example, you can allocate, this is this trick of allocating some memory for a string, and in front of that pointer you basically put some payload like maybe the length and so on, and you can use that, and it's more efficient than, more practical than using just a normal C string, another star array. And you can do the same with arrays. And that's good, but that's not the way the C APIs expect things to be. So it's like you can do that in your own programs, but not maybe you leverage other people's APIs. But the fact is that once you sort of go into have these arrays, C is really simple. It's like there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to basically do what PHP does. You could basically do that in C for most cases. It would be just as simple. Especially if you had like the similar memory model as PHP, you could basically just I will just arena allocate everything, and then I just destroy that after I render the page, whatever. So given that, I was like, it's really interesting to try to do that, like a more ergonomic C, and maybe that C will be able to can be used in like places where you today might go for C++ or something. And there are other, aside from SEG, we ended up, I started to like investigate a lot about the projects, and I want to mention them. Like before, like at the same time as JI and those projects were popping up, we also had like Crystal, which has this really slick syntax that looks really Ruby-like. And we also have Nim, of course, and Nim has, it's a pretty complex language actually. It does a lot of stuff. I personally feel that Nim and Crystal, they are like basically C++ replacements. And we also have the Beef language, programming language that was recently released publicly. It's also super interesting, but it's also like doing C++. Is a C, actually it's a C sharp replacement, I think. And then we have the C replacement languages besides Zig, and Odin is a language I like a lot. I agree with like 95% of the language design, and I borrowed a lot of ideas from Odin, I guess. I haven't implemented those ideas, but I'm planning on borrowing more or stealing more from Odin, and I basically hope that my language, people will steal ideas from my language as well, because there are a lot of languages, right? Odin and Zig and JI and C3 and Nim and Crystal and Beef and so on, and we can't really, use all of them. In the end, only one or two languages will sort of win the popularity battle, and I think it's important that we incorporate the best ideas into that whatever replacement we get for C. Odin is interesting. It's like it picked up a lot of inspiration, I think, from Jonathan Blow's language initially, like in doing the context and so on, using and a bit of the parametric polymorphism and so on. I think Ginger Bell will probably correct me, but I think that it feels like Ginger Bell was sort of looking at in JI the first sort of videos, and then it was like, I can do this. I'm just going to make a language myself, and I don't want to wait. And it's in the beginning it was really similar to JI, but now it definitely has its own character, and I think I should get in. I'll get to this later, but there's something to be said about simplicity in the language beyond pure using the just using the language, the feel when you use it. There is also something to be said about implementational simplicity. I want to mention some other languages. So first, before I get to that, I know there are some other C alternatives that I should mention. I think G, I don't know what Ju. I could pronounce it sort of in Chinese, but I don't know if that's the intent here. That's interesting. There was like Bitwise was doing a C-like language as well, and I think these are really fun to have a look at. There is once upon a time I wanted to do like really complex macros, and I saw this language. It's like, this is exactly what I wanted to do, and I just want to mention that as well. It's like, if you have seen this, where you could basically, where you can rewrite stuff. This is so insane. You can like do really nice rewrites of syntax. You have to look at this. I can't really go through it. I don't know it all that well, but it's super cool. And I started hanging out at the or programming languages Discord, and I met this language I want to mention. John Goodwin. He was I I learned a lot about implementing compilers by looking at John's code, and he's doing really good C. I think like a really comfortable, like clear C that I try to. I hope my code is as clear as his. He's doing something else, like basically trying to take Rust and do it a bit easier. You have to check that one out as well. Unfortunately, he doesn't have much time to work on the language right now, so this is going a bit slow. And I was also I was also looking a lot at Cyclone, because Cyclone was doing like a lot of interesting stuff developing basically C. I mean, some of the ideas went to Rust, but there's a lot of interesting stuff if you want to like work on a C clone or a C style language. You should really look at this for ideas. Now, so why am I writing C3? So I think that C2 is really good. It has a lot of good ideas, but C2 is Bass's thing, and I would like that to. I like to give it the idea behind it more chance to grow. Like that's the basic reason, and then there are obviously alternatives, C alternatives. We have Seg, we have Odin, we have a bunch of these, and I think the C syntax is good to keep to the C syntax. I think it's like better to have something more familiar. I don't think that you really need to go into new syntax land. You can just tweak it a bit. Very little, as little as possible, and then you will have much easier time, just jumping back and forth. I think that's really important to me. I mean, I write in several different languages, and if they differ too much, that can be like it's sort of time consuming because you forgot how to sort of write things. It's just, at least that happens for me. And I think that some of the languages that are done, I think Sig, single out Sig, sorry, for being very ambitious, big, like starting to get really big. And I think it's, what I like about C is that there are a lot of C compilers out there. People are doing C compilers for fun. And I don't see people like doing, like no one would do, let's sit down and do a Swift compiler for fun, because it's such a complex language to implement. So if a language is too complex so that it really can't easily be implemented by anyone else, then your compiler is how the language works. And I think that's a bad idea. It sort of it makes it easy to pile even more features on top of it, like, because all you do is like I can modify my own compiler, right? Add something more and more and more. But if you basically have a specification that you work from, then it's I feel that the language is getting more organized, and I also want to aggressively remove things that are not essential. I hate how C++ has grown. It's huge, right? And I also think that mostly, like seeing how Java is now gaining features, I think the gain for like everything we add, the actual gain is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So I like languages that are small. I think Pascal is like one of the best design languages. Like for, if you think of how tight that like specification and everything is done. And I think we underestimate the importance of having a language that everyone can sort of grasp. So that you actually understand the language and what you do with it, and you can dare to use the whole language. So Zig, I think, is like growing. It's very ambitious, but I don't think it's good to be like growing too much and get too complex, because no one will want to implement Zig on their own, I think, because it's it's advanced, but a language should be really complicated to implement, because that sort of leaks out into using the language as well and reading. So I think there's still room for writing a C-like, because I think people will like to do C. At least the C programs will like something that is close to C, that works mostly like C, so they don't need to have different mental models. But I don't know. I mean, it's also sort of interesting for me to do the whole compiler in C. So C3 compiler is written in C. I know Zig's compiler is written in C++, and so is Odin's. But I don't think we really need that. It's not necessary. And I think my compiler is proving that you can just use what you already have in C. So I already talked about 45 minutes. I don't know if there are any questions. So I have a question here. If you found so productive with Pascal, would you consider making a Pascal 2? Do you think C3 is in a better place in that regard than Pascal? I think Pascal obviously has... Pascal was never made to be a complete language, but it's really simple to extend it. So there are a million extensions to Pascal, and then we have also Modula 2, and we have the Oberon. It's like Oberon 7, right? There's a new version, or I don't know. I don't remember if that's like 7 or 17, right? But I think it's still getting updates. But I think if one be realistic about converting people to a new language, it has to be a bit like, if it's C-like, that helps. I mean, there's a reason why Java kept it really C-like. It's very it feels bad to really say that that okay, because this looks like C, so it has a better chance of succeeding. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the value of familiar things, because I mean, if you go from C to C3, then most of the things that you think you want to do in C is going to be valid, right, in C3. If I would take Pascal and do a Pascal 2, right, like leaving aside that there is, I mean, Model 2 is basically Pascal 2. Leaving that aside, like getting people into start writing Pascal is going to take some effort, and like basically, I think that Odin is already doing a good job doing a Pascal-like language. And if it can succeed, then I think that would be a great alternative. So I'm not doing something Pascal-like because Odin is already doing that. And I just hope he succeeds, Ginger Bill. Any other question? Oh, by the way, I think that the reason why I was feeling productive with Pascal is basically because it's procedural programming. I didn't do, at the time, I didn't do C that much because I didn't really have a compiler for C for that long a time before I started doing C++ and stuff. But to me, like, C was okay, like you could do everything that Pascal could do and you could do some more stuff. So that was really exciting. And you could like do it a little more compact, and you had like some things were feeling like a little less, you know, like a teaching program. But I mean, Pascal was super clear. I really liked reading Pascal. Reading Pascal is great. And I think it's really important that a programming language is very readable. And that is why, for example, we could talk about Rust and macros. You know, Rust macros, also nim macros. I think macros in those languages are not really readable. If you want to look at the actual macro code, what it like understand that at a glance. So languages, and that's part of the language, right? So I think, and this is also some criticism I have against SIG, because it's really hard to tell when you look at compile time code and runtime code and normal runtime code. It's really hard to at a glance sort of see what it does. So adding macros, which I did, like I have macros in C3, is something I do really carefully because it hurts readability. So I think lots of languages, they have a lot of features, but they haven't thought about readability enough, in my opinion. And like Pascal is like the king of readability. You have to write some more stuff, but it's really easy to read. So that's why it's so great. Any other questions? So I just want to go back to the design principles, I guess, before I end this. So procedural, get things done type of language. This is basically what I felt when I was doing Pascal. I was basically getting things done, and I've started to migrate stuff that I've written in C++ to more like less object-oriented style, and I feel like, you know, this is just, I'm just removing complexity. But the big project for me, like proving that my intuition of like what I did back in the days, like this was, you know, 20 years ago with Pascal, and my feelings about that is correct, you know, more than 20 years ago. The procedural style is like it's for most things is like, you know, it's great. It's really productive, and the compiler really proves that. And another thing that sort of goes into why I don't want to do Pascal and why I'm sort of different from the other languages is I want to, you know, keep C ABI compatibility. So you can call into C3, and you can call out of C3, and to any C library, it's like C, right? And none of the others really have that ambition to do that. And I also try not. I mean, I enjoy having the constraints of writing a language that is basically has to be like C, because it prevents me from going, in a tangent and just think of, oh, I could do this and this and this, and like suddenly you have some really complex feature that you shouldn't really have added. And working inside of the constraints of C, that sort of limits what I can do, but that's a good limit to me. I think that my problems before was basically you could do anything. Like this language could look like anything, and anything easily becomes like, okay, I have to research everything. Now I'm just stuck, having to research what I could do within the C syntax or C feeling, and that, I think, to me is problem enough. I mean, I've been thinking like, how should semantic macros work while still almost being like the C macros, but yet easier to use. And like right now, it's like how maybe I want to do a tagged union built in, but how should that look without breaking what we feel is natural to C? And that's really hard. But let's say I didn't have the constraints, then maybe I would like think of 1,000 ways to improve on having tagged unions, and it would be way too complex, and I would go on and I would just don't have this kind of structure I get from being constrained to C. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll quit here. Then thanks for watching. Bye bye.